Hello, welcome to Walpole United WFC.
Good evening and welcome to Walpole United WFC with me, Matt Crane. Talking tonight about the importance of social media for growing the women's game and how we can sort of boost that and just grow the game. Look to use social media, look to use advertising in women's football. We'll be chatting about that. I've got Gareth with me tonight. Gareth, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. And Richard as well, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks, Matt. Good to be on. Thanks for having me on.
So in advertising, mainly going to touch sort of lower down the pyramid to start off with, and then we'll talk a little bit sort of about higher up as well. So Richard, do you want to sort of introduce what you do then and what you're sort of involved in?
Yeah, hi. I've been working in social media with Stourbridge Football Club for, all told, probably about 7 or 8 years now, maybe a bit longer than that. Started off because I felt the club wasn't using social media very well, and I went to the chairman one day. This is on the men's side of things, really, and I said to the chairman, our social media output is rubbish. And he said, okay, I don't disagree. Do you want to have a go at it? So I sort of knew that was what he would say to me, because that's the way he is. So I said, okay, yeah, I will do. And that was how I got involved initially for Stourbridge in the Southern League. Did that for 4 or 5 years, and it became a little bit all-consuming, as these things tend to. So I took a bit of a break from it for a couple of years, and got more involved in Stourbridge ladies at that point in terms of watching their games. I developed a bit of an interest through the social media side of things, feeling that we ought to publicise that a bit more. And then rather than a job, if you like, it became a bit of a passion to go and watch the team on a Sunday. And then got involved on the social media side of things with them. We have our own account for the ladies team, although there's a big crossover with the main club account as to what we do and how we publicise the team. And it's sort of grown from there. So I'm in charge now, if you like, of the social media side of things for Stourbridge FC ladies. And it's become a busy thing to be dealing with, really. So it's full on a lot of the time, as you can imagine.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I know if we're just doing things like this, ours is just full on, like literally notifications and non-stop. You're trying to reply to everybody, take suggestions, and like you say, get ideas sort of going. It's quite difficult. Gareth, I want to sort of bring you in then. Obviously, like I said, we'll start with sort of tiers 3 to 6 downwards then. Social media we'll start with, and then we'll do advertising later in the show. What do you make of it in tiers 3 to 6? Because whenever I look and I follow various teams, it's quite varied. But what do you make of it? Is it something that's maybe lacking? Is it good? Is it okay? Is there a need for more? Where do you sort of stand on this? I know it's quite a open-ended question. We'll sort of break it down, but just initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the differences between a good social media presence and an average one is enormous. I think if you look at, you're going to have a lot of clubs that generally will kind of go out, they'll do the match day updates and stuff like that, and then kind of from Monday to Friday not really post anything. Weekend, occasionally a few kind of scheduled tweets promoting the game, but that'll be kind of about it, which is fine. That's adequate. As I think the important thing with the social media is that you can follow the game if you're not there. That I think should be the very minimum. But I think where you get teams that have a really good social media presence, that can be huge. I think if you look at if you look at the men's game as well and the women's game at #United, for example. Now, granted, they're slightly different in the sense that they're coming off the back of Spencer, who has a massive social media presence anyway. But you look at how quickly they've been able to move through the pyramid, And that's just because they're able to recruit players that are essentially dropping levels to go and play for them because they've got that social media presence. And I think, we've had conversations at FC that have mentioned this as well, but how, a good presence on social media is really helpful for recruitment and getting players to kind of want to come in and play.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where the next level is. I think there's a lot of clubs that are doing like good match day content. But I think the stuff that fans want to see is kind of that behind the scenes type stuff. And that, I mean, even at kind of the top 2 levels, that's not particularly forthcoming. But yeah, like those accounts that will kind of really give access to the team and allow you to kind of feel as though you're getting to know the team and the players, that's kind of where the real kind of value in social media is, I think.
Yeah. I'll come to yourself then, Richard. Obviously, you were mentioning sort of, that you took a break and it was very full on. And I think, especially sort of lower down, we're relying a lot on volunteers, aren't we?
This is a point I was going to make, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, feel free if you want to start on that. I was just going to say sort of, how serious do sort of people treat it? Because again, it's difficult, especially if you're on your own. Like if there's a team of you, it's not too bad. But sort of from your point of view or from your experience, then how does it sort of look tiers 3 to 6?
Yeah, I think Gareth made the point perhaps that tiers 3, there's a big difference between tier 3 and tier 6 in terms of the size of clubs, the size of fan bases. And it is very varied. But I think you've got to look at volunteer resources. I mean, obviously I'm not a player. I'm not involved in the management side of things. I'm not really involved in the admin side of things. This is my only role within the club. So there's no other pressure on my time. So, a lot of clubs, I think players possibly run or managers run the social media accounts as well. Obviously, that's a problem on a match day, because if you're playing or if you're sitting on the bench, you shouldn't really be sitting on the bench twiddling with your phone because you've got to tweet there's just been a goal. And if you're playing in the match, that's obviously a problem. So I see a lot of accounts which are decent accounts of decent clubs, but don't tweet anything on a match day about the scoreline and might not even give you the score after the match. And I think I'm not going to be critical of clubs because volunteer resources are scarce, but I think clubs have got to look at, are we doing the basics? From my point of view, I'm always trying to think of who am I tweeting to here? Who am I serving? And there's 2 or 3 different groups of people. Obviously, you've got your own fans. And when I say our own fans, I'm talking a lot of cases about people who support the men's team. Let's be honest about it. And our following, the ladies' team's following on social media is about 1,700, whereas the men's team has about 14,000 followers. So that's why our match day updates go through the men's account, if you want to call it the men's account, the men's club account, because it's got a far bigger reach. It's as simple as that. Most of the day-to-day news stuff we put out through the ladies' account, and it might get retweeted on the men's account, and there is a strategy for doing that rather than being haphazard, because then it has the bigger reach. But we're not taking over the men's account, the main account, which is always a bit of a bugbear. We've got to make sure the men get more publicity than the women, or at least that the women don't take over. So that's one group of people that you're communicating with is your own existing fan base. The other group of people is people who are not your existing fan base, people who don't follow the team or the club at the moment, and you're trying to reel them in. And I think information is key. You can't give people too much information. Yeah. The more information you give them, the more knowledge they have, the more inclined they are to say, actually, I know a bit about this team. I'm a bit interested in this. I'll go and watch a match. Once you've got them to watch a match, you talk to our manager, Andy Fisher. I know you've had him on the show. He will tell you it only takes one match. You get people to come and watch a match, they get it. And there's every chance then they will come and watch another match, and then another match, and you've got them. And that to me it's all about knowledge. Knowledge is power. You give people knowledge, they've got everything they need then to develop that interest. And I think there are a lot of clubs don't think about that. And I'd extend that beyond clubs to leagues and to county FAs as well. I'll give you an example. And again, this is not to be critical. Birmingham County FA, we're involved in the Birmingham County Cup. We won our quarter-final yesterday. We're in the semi-final. Go back to the draw for the last round for the quarter-finals. It wasn't publicised in advance. It just appeared on the Birmingham County FA website one afternoon. I happened to be looking and found it. It wasn't tweeted by the County FA for another 24 hours, by which time all the clubs had picked up on it, all the clubs had announced their draws. So the County FA tweeting it is superfluous. It's out there. Why not tell people in advance, we're going to be making the draw this afternoon. It'll be on social media at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whenever it is. Tune in. You've built some interest. That way you're developing an interest straight away. You've got a bit of a buzz. You know, it might not be a huge buzz, but create something out of it rather than being beaten to the punch by the clubs themselves. That's just one small example of how I think clubs and county FAs can be a little bit more on the ball. And again, it does come down to manpower. It does come down sometimes to it's the way we've always done things. Think about the way you can change doing things. Think about the way you can improve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one big frustration. And again, you know, I think back to obviously when we were, you know, following Man United women in season 1, and there was absolutely nothing out there. Like you said, there was no idea, information. There was sort of nothing if you watched from afar. You know, there was no, like you say, no cup information, things like that. And I think it's just, you know, how are fans supposed to follow it? Like you say, you know, you might be thinking of going to a game. You might think, oh, well, you know, I'm free this week, or I've got that. Or you might even have travel arrangements, and there's absolutely nothing out there in terms of information. I'll bring you in on this, Gareth, as well, because I know, obviously, you know, we do a little bit slower down. Obviously, John was sort of Stourbridge. But what should we say?
Sorry, say that again. I think you broke up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, obviously, we sort of following on from what Richard was saying about, you know, sort of getting information out there and knowing.
Yeah, I think it's really key. Like, I think we know from this season, right, when we've kind of not had anything to go to, like, oh, cool, we'll try and find a game. And, you know, the FA full-time website is not particularly up to date. You know, it is, some of the fixtures aren't necessarily kind of as correct as they can be. And there's times when we've been looking for a game and it's been a slog to try and find one that's on, and you look on social media and there's not really anything on there. And yeah, I kind of think it's not, you know, it's not just on the clubs. It is, you know, from the kind of top down, that this information kind of needs to be there and readily available. Now, you know, I've not looked really this season at going to tiers 5 or 6. You know, I think we've kind of stretched ourselves out relatively thin with, you know, tiers 1, 2, 4, and, you know, the tier 3 game we've gone to. You know, I had plans that I wanted to go to Feds at some point, but I've just not had time to get down there, and it's only around the corner. So, but even so, you know, like the minimum you should be able to expect is to kind of log on, look on a club's social media, you know, whether that's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or wherever it is, find where the fixture is being played, what time kickoff is, and how much it is to get in. So, you know, there's been times when that's not been available. So, yeah, you know, I think things are starting to get better. But like we say, you know, a lot of the time it is relying on volunteers, and people have got full-time jobs, and, you know, they're kind of like trying to do the Twitter in lunch breaks and so on, or schedule tweets to go out. And yeah, you know, it can be difficult. But I think, you know, things are starting to improve. They are starting to look up and look better. I know we're going to get onto it a bit later, but, you know, the FA Cup, there's been some really interesting ties in that now, with the championship teams coming in around earlier. And yeah, I think things are starting to move in the right direction. But yeah, I think, you know, the minimum things that you want to be able to see is how can you get to the game? If the information about the game isn't online anywhere, then you can't expect people to go.
Can I just pick up on something there? Our pinned tweet is always our next game. Venue, who we're playing, what time kickoff, what competition, how much it is to get in if there's an admission price. Simple as that. So as soon as somebody comes to our Twitter page, that's the first thing they see. That's the first piece of information that almost anybody will be coming for, I would imagine. And that's quite simple. Every Sunday night after we've played a game, maybe Monday, depending on whether I remember. But that's the first piece of information that will go up. On the FA Cup, I think the changes that have been made to the format of the FA Cup this season, I don't know whether it was deliberate with this in mind, but it's one of the best things that's happened in women's football domestically in years. The potential for more lower level clubs to go further in the FA Cup now is huge compared with last season. You know, last year you only had 12 ties in the first round proper. The chances of a tier 5 or 6 team getting to that stage, let alone getting further, were minimal. Now you've got this year, I think in the third round, there were 4 teams from tier 5 or below, including Clapton, tier 7, got to the third round. The opportunities for them to publicise on the back of that and to grow their own clubs are huge. There's some things that have got to be got right. I don't think the rules of the competition, as far as, dare I say, prize money is one thing, but expenses is another. You know, you look at the journey Clapton had to make and had to fundraise for that. That's got to catch up. There should be a pot for clubs to be able to claim expenses if they're travelling above a certain distance or a certain travelling time, or if they require an overnight stay. And you can come up with fairly simple rules as to when clubs are entitled to claim expenses from a central FA pot. That's not a difficult one to put right. And I think it's just a case of the new format caught up with the FA this year, and they hadn't probably thought about this being an issue. So I wouldn't criticise the FA for that. Prize money is a separate thing that's got to be looked at. Hopefully it will be. But the Women's FA Cup, like the Men's FA Cup, is the biggest possible vehicle for driving interest in clubs at the lower level. So I hope they keep the format the same, and I hope it's pushed more. And I think the Vitality Women's FA Cup Twitter account this year, I think, has cottoned onto that a little bit. I've seen a lot more activity and focus on the smaller clubs as the competition has gone on, and a lot more attempts to make something out of that. So I think that's a really, really positive sign. I'm never like to be critical of the FA. So I think there's more they could do, but I think you've got to be realistic day to day what they can do for tiers 5 and below, because there's a whole lot of the country to cover, and it is very much localised football at that level. So I think you've got to look at the leagues themselves. And again, that's a volunteer issue in terms of what the leagues can do. But I think they sometimes, in some instances, they can do a bit more. But it comes down to clubs themselves. You know, what can clubs make of themselves? And they might think that social media is a bit of a bonus. It's something we can do if and when we've got time. I think it's more important than that. And I think clubs, again, not to be critical, if they can find the volunteer time, it's a key issue, because you're not just talking about bringing in supporters, you're talking about bringing in sponsors, you're talking about bringing in players, you're talking about presenting your club in the best possible light to advertisers. So there's a whole lot more than just giving people information. It's a vehicle to drive other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Gareth, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. I think, we've spoken about prize money with the FA Cup a lot. But yeah, I think that, expenses as a bare minimum is kind of what we should be expecting. I don't think, there's no way that a club should be out of pocket having to kind of put a team together in the FA Cup. It should, if the losing prize money isn't going to cover your trip, then there should be a pot that we should be able to tap into to round that up.
Yeah, 100%. I think just sort of, again, just expanding on what we've talked about. I think obviously we sort of talked about our target audience and giving information, but I think another thing as well, obviously I mentioned Man United in season 1, on a match day as well, and this is something obviously you'll be able to sort of come in as well on this, Richard. You talked about obviously pinning the game at the top for your next game and where it is, but I think on a match day as well, there's very little. I mean, listen, the probably team news posted, but there's very little other than that. I appreciate it's difficult to sort of tweet, like you mentioned before, goal updates and things like that, especially lower down if you're, the only person and somebody else can't do it. But again, even something as simple for me, like a half time or a full time, scoreline and sort of who scored and maybe a little match report as well. Do you feel that may be, again, sort of, without, like I say, sort of going into massive lengths just on your own, do you think that's something that maybe clubs lower down could look at doing if possible?
Yeah, I think there are ways of doing it, even if you've got a player or a manager running the account, which often, you may well have. Talk to a parent. There are parents at every match. We know that. And the parents, I hope, they might have their differences of opinion with the manager sometimes over playing their daughter in certain positions or playing her at all. But hopefully they're there for the positive side of the club. And if you've got a parent that you think you can trust as being responsible, who's not going to lay into the opposition or the referee on social media, then give them the job. Let them have the login. Let them do it. As long as they know the parameters, and if they slip up, you can chuck them out and not give them access again. Do that. Find a way of making sure that you get the information out there on match day. I think that is. Got the score lines on match days are so important. It's the fundamental. Why do we play football? We play matches and know what's happening in the matches. So I think it's the basic.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just bring you in again, Rich, and then I'll let you sort of follow on for it, Gareth. Obviously, you were talking about sort of the men's side and the men's account, obviously having the bigger reach. What do you make of that then in terms of women's football in general? Because I know it's sort of, whenever I've spoke to people, it splits opinion. So, for example, Man City women, I know like they'll use their women's account only on a match day and everything else is on the men's account. But for some people, they sort of say it should be separate. But how do you feel? Because I suppose for me, it's a fine line between reaching the target audience, which, in that case, the men's account with more followers makes sense, versus losing information because there's a lot of information going on there, obviously with the men's as well. And like you talked about, it's important not to overload it. But what do you think is a general for that then? I mean, could the men's accounts be sort of useful for growing it? Or do you think maybe, like you sort of talked on earlier, sort of a split, maybe match day versus the rest of the week?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right and a wrong. Different clubs have different ways of doing it. Obviously, Lewis are the one example that you might tend to look at. I think I'm right in saying they have effectively totally separate accounts, which are sort of 50-50, if you like. There's as much output, and I don't know how they do for followers, one compared with the other. I haven't looked at that, but they tend to keep the two completely separate. But with cross-pollination, they'll retweet each other's news. Yeah. I think that's a good way of doing it if you can build up sufficient following. But I gave you the numbers and the main accounts followers compared with our women's accounts followers. Yeah. There isn't really a comparison yet, and we're continuing to grow followers on the women's account. So I think if you can cross-pollinate properly, and make sure that the important news from the women's side of things is going out on the men's account. Because I call it the men's account, it's the club account. And the women's account is it's a slightly different way of doing things, in that you can be a bit more lighthearted, a bit more frivolous, take the mickey a little bit more. It doesn't matter quite so much, if I can put it that way. And I think there was a point last season, towards what would usually be the end of the season in April, when the men's team had obviously finished playing. The season had been discontinued in December. There were no more games. And in a sense, almost the men's team, I won't say the club, but the men's team had shut down until the restart of the season and pre-season friendlies. The women's team had actually set up, once they were allowed to play again, allowed to have spectators again, they set up an end-of-season competition with 7 other local teams, 2 groups of 4. And at the same time, we'd had the upward movement scheme come into place with the FA. So we were in a situation where there was very little news coming out of the men's side of the club, for obvious reasons, but all of a sudden there was a lot of news coming from the women's team. There were matches being played, there was a promotion campaign possible, and the chairman said to me one day, we've got to be careful about this, because we're getting a lot of news from the women's team, and people are going to start thinking we're a women's club as a men's team on the side. And I said, well, okay, I take that point, but this is the situation. There's things happening on the women's side there aren't on the men's team. So we're not getting to a point where the women's team is taking over, but just to show you that you've got to be a little bit conscious of that side of things sometimes. But as long as the news is getting out there from the main account, the important things, next match day, scorelines on the match day itself, I think is a key thing. We want to get that to as many followers as we can. And league tables, cup draws, all that important stuff is getting out to as many people as we can. Then the slightly lighter hearted stuff that isn't quite so important, keep that to the women's account where your really keen followers can pick up on that and interact. But there are other vehicles as well. You know, the match day program, we don't have a match day program for the women's team yet, except for maybe the big FA Cup ties. But the men's match day program always carries a news page on the women's team, almost always carries a feature interview on a player. Often there'll be a page of photographs from one of the recent matches. So that's another way of reaching the audience, getting news out there to where followers of the men's team are going to be reading it. So there are other vehicles as well. And of course, you know, you've also got the club website, which we try to treat the two teams reasonably on a par if we can. Again, it's one of those areas where the men's team, if there's news from both teams, the men's piece will always take priority. But it's using every vehicle you possibly can to get the information out there to as many people as you possibly can. And even if it's not a tweet that goes out from the men's account, retweet it from the men's account. So it's at least reaching that reach if it's not going directly from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just to follow on, like, I think Man City have got it, and you know, it pains me to compliment them, but I think they kind of have the balance quite nicely, as in the main club account at Man City will tweet out links to buy the tickets, and it will tweet out like the pre-match build-up. So, for example, on there at the moment is a link to buy a ticket for the game tomorrow night. There's Gareth Taylor's kind of pre-match interview, kind of discussing the team news and stuff like that. But then, as of tomorrow, all of the game updates and stuff will go onto the Man City women page. So, I quite like that balance in that they're still putting stuff out on the main club account, but then they're not kind of just putting everything on there. If you want kind of the general kind of updates, then they're there. But if you want anything specific and kind of minute by minute, that's done on a separate account. And I think as well, if we kind of, again, can use hashtag as an example, if you look at their main YouTube channel, they don't, for their men's content, they have every game they'll have a vlog and highlights of. For the women, they generally do it each month or every 2 months, and they'll kind of have highlights of every game and a roundup of all the games on there. And then I can't remember who it is, their captain, Matt, that then does like a vlog for every single game, which is available on a separate channel. And that's available on a separate channel again. So you are kind of getting that content out there to the wider audience who can kind of pick and choose to watch it if they want to. And obviously it's not viewed as much as the kind of like weekly men's stuff is. But the option is there. People will draw people's attention to it, and gradually, you know, just from kind of being able to get that kind of attention on and eyes on the game, people will then start to kind of start paying attention to it. I think we've seen at FC as well, they've got Kirsty Chambers as part of the marketing campaign on the club's shop. So again, there's just eyes on that. Yeah, for example, hashtag United 2 days ago, their men's highlights package went up 128k views, and then the women's for October, November is 26,000, which, you know, significantly less, 100k less. However, 26,000 people watching anything with the women's game is a significant number, let alone aside as far down the pyramid as hashtag. So, you know, it's getting eyes on the product. I think eyes on the product will eventually start to make it grow. You know, it's a similar kind of mechanism of growth, but on a much smaller scale than the FA Cup and the Euros are. People watch them, they get interested, they go, oh, well, I'll follow my local club team. again, you get eyes on the product. People go, oh, I'm a little bit interested in this. I'll kind of just watch these videos now as they come up on YouTube. I'll see what this is about. And then eventually you might go, oh, we'll make a weekend of it. We'll go and see the game on Saturday, and then we'll go on Sunday and watch the women as well. And I think that's kind of the way that this is going to grow.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. Just looking at the comment here, club's a little bit slow. Obviously there again, sort of main account picking up later on. And I think that for me again, and obviously we've sort of talked about this about getting it right, but I think when there's information to be published, for me, and again, obviously, sort of tiers 3 to 6, it's difficult unless it is like, sort of a paid job, which it never is. But I think getting out information as soon as possible is also key. And I think, there's times where clubs, I mean, like we've obviously touched on game day, but there's times when clubs, could have tweeted something that they've, found out about a while ago. For instance, when you mentioned earlier, Richard, with sort of, the cup draw, things like that. And I think, keeping fans in the loop is massive, Things for me as well, I really like sort of seeing videos, I like it when clubs post videos as well as just, pictures in general context. I think the videos, like we touched on earlier, and I think one of you mentioned about sort of getting to know the players and getting a feel for the club. If you see something on there that you love, I know there was one, I think John shared it, and it was like, Andy Fisher celebrating at a Stourbridge game. And people love, like the passion and the excitement. That would be one of yours, I bet, Richard, would it?
It wouldn't, no. To be honest with you, we have a club photographer, a guy called Paul Rose, who's absolutely brilliant. He comes to most of our games, home and away, and he takes photos, and he does do some video recording as well in between the photos. So that was probably one of his, probably from the end of the match at Derby. But with videos, match highlights, probably one area where we're a little bit not where I would like us to be. It's something that we can use to expand. Geez, I'm not saying we're perfect, far from it. If anybody thinks watching this thinking I'm saying how good we are and everybody else is rubbish, far from it. We've got a lot of areas we can improve on, and where we'd like to improve, but it's bit by bit. It's absolutely doing what you can when you can to improve things. You talk about clubs putting information out, and I mentioned Derby. That's an interesting example. I don't want to be critical of Derby, very, very far from it. But when the FA Cup draw was made, this is the first round proper, which is Derby a tier 3 team. This is the round they come into the competition. We're a tier 5 team. We were drawn away at Derby. Obviously, from our point of view, having already won through 2 rounds, reached the first round proper, which last year we got to the first round. That was the furthest we'd ever gone. So to have got to the same stage again, it's a big thing for us. We were waiting for the draw to come out. Derby away, all over social media straight away. Huge draw, big response from people, from players, from the management, from supporters. Big thing for us. I don't think Derby mentioned the draw on social media for at least a week, even that it had happened.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, don't want to be critical, but really astonished me. For a tier 3 club affiliated to a professional football club, that I thought that was baffling, and I don't understand it. And I don't understand why supporters aren't saying to them, "Where's the FA Cup draw? Who have we got in the cup?" And that can only be because they haven't generated that interest through their own activity. And it's sort of self-perpetuating. That's just one small example, and as I say, I'm picking on another club. I've probably got no right to do that. So, my apologies to whoever it is who runs the account at Derby for picking on you in that way.
Yeah. No, to be fair though, I mean, obviously, using examples. To be fair, in my view, it's spot on what you say, because if you think Derby are they first, second in the 3rd tier, if they go up to the
they went top just after we'd beaten them. Did I mention that we beat them?
I think John might have briefly. No, I'm
he might have touched on it now and again.
briefly mentioned that. Yeah, you beat a tier 3 side at top of tier 3, but it's spot on, and it sort of links into this here. And we talked about sort of feedback and getting better. Like when you said tweeting clubs and saying things. I think something again. I can only speak from sort of our fan base at Man United Women, and the amount of people say, where's the training photos? Where's the videos? Where's this? Where's that? And it's this, that's WSL. That's top 4, top 5 in the WSL. So it just goes to show that whilst it is difficult lower down, even clubs in the top 2 tiers, where I know in the WSL they're paid, and you have sort of the media people and the social media people, and they're all in paid roles, it's still lacking, which for me it's astonishing, because if that's your job, you think you should be giving it 110%, and it shouldn't get to the point where we're sort of questioning, why is this not happening? Why is that? Can we see this? Can we see that? And I think, it sort of summarizes the whole conversation we've had tonight, doesn't it, about getting that information to fans?
Very much.
And putting it out there again. We'll have a look at this other one here. Everton versus Man United at Old Trafford. Hardly any advertisement. Now, I don't attend the men's game, so I wouldn't know if they put anything out. But I know the club have put bits out. But it's like, this is something that's happening in March. Now, whilst people may say this is, 2 months away, it's like, if you want to fill Old Trafford, how crucial is your advertisement? How crucial is everything? And we see, across the whole women's game, players have to post on the story just to advertise games. Yet, if you look at the men's game, I mean, some do it, mostly sort of agents and sports management companies do it on the player's behalf, but it's not often that, every single player will post it. But I'll bring you in on this, Gareth, sort of the advertisement side of women's football in general. Obviously, we talked about sort of the information and giving people the basics, but what do you make of sort of general advertising and maybe how it can be improved as well?
I think it's a tricky one, because I think you've got to create the interest somehow, and I don't necessarily think that advertising necessarily in and of itself creates that interest. If you look at Barcelona for their El Clasico game at the new camp, they've sold 85,000 tickets, because there is a buzz around Barcelona at the moment. Now, it's easy to create that buzz when you're the European champions, arguably the best club side on the planet. It's easy for that to get that attention. But if you think, if you look at kind of this Old Trafford game that we're talking about, if we get 20,000 there, I'll be pretty impressed.
But will that be unfairly considered a failure because you didn't fill the stadium?
I don't think it would necessarily be considered a failure. I think the barometer will probably be the game at the Etihad a few years ago against City. Now, again, that was a derby. But yeah, I think the game against Everton, it's a funny one, because it's not normally a game where you go, that's going to get, we're going to get 3 stands open for that.
Yeah.
There's other games which I think would have been better to have it at. But obviously it depends on the availability of the stadium. So I think if we're kind of mid to high 20,000s, that'll be a success. I just can't see us filling Old Trafford. I think the advantage that Barcelona have got is the fact that they're European champions. Their players have just won the Ballon d'Or, has won the FIFA Best Player in the World this week. We won't talk about Team of the Year because that was a joke, but there is a buzz around that team at the moment, and that's come from being on the pitch. And if you can't create that buzz on the pitch, then you've got to do something off of it to get the attention there. And we saw at the game we had at the Etihad a few seasons ago, there was from Man City a lot of advertising for that. It was on Twitter. There was kind of like advertising up around. Granted, they gave a lot of free tickets away, but I feel that's also a means of attracting a fan base. If you sell it to kids, then inevitably there's got to be a parent to bring them along, so you're getting 2 people come in. Now, it depends kind of what fan base you want to sell it to, but I think encouraging fans that are going to be there for years and years and years to come is probably not a bad way to start. The Euros is a strange one. Like, they're coming up this year, and we're starting now to see adverts. I've seen Caroline Gray. No, who was it? Danielle van der Donk I saw on a bus stop in Wigan, advertising the Euros, because obviously it's being held in Lee. So, starting to kind of see these things coming around. I just think that it's tricky, because advertising in and of itself, I don't think is enough to to create a significant swell of support. You might get a few thousand people that see those adverts on the buses and go, oh yeah, I'll whack in for some general admission tickets for this. I'll see what it's like. Like I did with the Netball World Cup being held in Liverpool, saw a billboard as I was driving into the city. I was like, I'll see what's on. And I think I watched Papua New Guinea against somebody else, just to kind of see what it was like, but wouldn't necessarily class myself as a netball fan, probably wouldn't go back. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think there needs to be that combination of advertising off the pitch, and men's games are a great way of doing it. The matchday program is an idea I think is fantastic, but also there needs to be that buzz on the pitch. And obviously with Stourbridge at the moment, they're winning a lot of games, going well in cups, going well in the league, and results creates buzz more than any kind of advertising will do as well. So,
Of course it does.
it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I'm going to disagree on is the 20k at Old Trafford. I said I wanted all the lower tiers sold out in all 4 stands, so whatever that may be. Just because it looks better. Obviously, your TV cameras aren't going to be filming up in the air, are they? They're not going to be bothered who's sat at the top of the Stretford end in the second tier. So I think, like the City game, like you said, Gareth, obviously all the lower tiers were sold out. I think they opened the upper tier behind us and maybe one at the side as well. And, we saw, was it 32,000?
It was a record at the time.
Yeah, Tottenham have done it in their sort of men's stadiums, with a degree of success. Trying to think as well, West Ham have done it before. Now Arsenal,
Chelsea
at the Emirates. Yeah, so it sort of, it always divides views, that. But what I wanted to bring you in on, Richard, was the point you mentioned sort of when we had a chat off camera, was about, do individual leagues in the FA do enough? And obviously this isn't to sort of sit here and slate them, but I just feel like sometimes as well, if they could help or give clubs pointers or even speak to clubs and say, do you know what, maybe have you tried this in social media, or how, this works, and sort of give them an idea. But what's your views on that then? Sort of, like I say, just leagues tweeting info, like weekly fixtures, for example, or kick-off times?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the FA in terms of giving some guidance to clubs. I think that, to me, sounds like a very good idea. And it probably would be fairly easy to do. But in terms of leagues, again, you're talking largely about volunteer-run leagues, and sitting here as somebody who's a little bit involved in a club, I'm not sure I know half of what leagues have to do in terms of rearranging fixtures, appointing referees, admin on player signings and registrations, and so account is another, necessarily always top of the list of priorities. But at the same time, I think it would help leagues, and I'm talking specifically here about tiers 5 and 6, because the Women's Championship and the Women's National League have got their own Twitter accounts, presumably run by somebody in the FA. But the tier 5 and 6 regional leagues, to have a Twitter account for the league, which basically really only needs to give the fixtures maybe on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday morning, the results on a Sunday night or a Monday morning, and a league table, cup draws when they're made, and that's probably about it. You don't need to interact with fans. In fact, I'd probably discourage a league from doing that because it's a slippery slope. You don't need to interact with clubs. You've got proper channels of communication for doing that. It's very, very simple, very, very basic, and it probably only takes 10 or 15 minutes, if that, maybe half an hour in total out of your week. Okay, it's probably half an hour that people would say, I just haven't got that time, and I'm not going to argue with that. It's not to be critical, but it seems to me like a simple thing that leagues could do. And some, I don't follow all the tier 5 and 6 leagues. Some of them probably do it. I know our own league doesn't, and as I say, I'm not going to be critical of them for that. But it is something that possibly, potentially, perhaps they haven't thought about that could be done. In terms of clubs, I think the one thing I'd say about clubs is there's more room for clubs to interact with each other. If you want to call, I hate the word, but if you want to call it banter, call it banter. We don't need to take ourselves too seriously. I hope we don't. Sometimes maybe that gets you into a little bit of trouble, but you can always apologise. There's nobody looking. Nobody cares about women's football, as we know. So you're never going to get yourself into too much trouble. But there's room for clubs to work together. Again, I'll give you a little example, not to blow our own trumpet, but we got to the third round of the FA Cup this year, furthest we've ever gone by a long chalk. So did Lytown, who are only a mile away from us, furthest they've ever gone in the cup as well. We got in touch with BBC Midlands today and said, look, why don't you come and cover us? Send a crew down, see us at training. And by the way, why don't you do the same with Lytown as well? There's your story. 2 local clubs, both got this far in the competition. So they did. And we were both on Midlands today, 2 or 3 minute feature. They filmed both clubs at training. They had managers on from both clubs and players, brief interviews. And that's ways that I think clubs can work together. Okay, that's an extreme example because, you're not going to have that situation in the FA Cup every week or even every year.
Yeah, sure.
But we like to think that if there were 4 clubs from our division got to the first round of the cup this year, on the Sunday morning, we wished the others well and we commiserated or congratulated them after the game. And I think that's the way in which you can. Is women's football a big family or not? Are we all working together or not? Are we all trying to grow the game or not? Again, with other clubs, volunteer resources, it comes down to time. It comes down to, you've got 10 spare minutes, or have you not got 10 spare minutes? People don't have the time. But if you do, and if you can interact with other clubs and push interest in other clubs as well, it's not a crime, I don't think, for us to say we're away in the FA Cup today, but Lytown are at home. Why don't you go and watch them?
Yeah, absolutely.
But maybe, you get a bit of stick for that because our development team were playing at home the same day. So why wasn't I encouraging people to go and watch the development team? Well, I did, but I encouraged them to go and watch Ly as well. But you can work together because we're all in this for the same aim, surely.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, it was something I noticed as well. This weekend just gone, the Oldham men's team had their game postponed again, which is good because we didn't lose. So, but at the same time, they tweeted out saying, we haven't got a game today, but there's these non-league sides that have got a game on, which hopefully Rochdale will do the same for us when we're non-league next year. But there are things that can be done. I think it's difficult for leagues to advertise clubs because inevitably what you'll get is there's no way to do it equally. If you just say, for example, the National League North, you've got the Premier League, the Premier Division North, and the Division 1 North, you're looking at 25 clubs there. So you can promote one club per match day. Obviously, it'd be 2 because of games, but inevitably there's going to be a disparity between who gets most advertising. So I think that will kind of create some rifts potentially. But I think at the moment tweeting out the fixture list is fine. I would like to see it be less on independent kind of journalistic things like Since 71, for example.
Yeah.
To kind of get on board with it. I would like to see more of the bigger national journalists kind of tweeting stuff out as well. But then to be fair to them, like Tom Gary said a few months ago, it's really difficult for them because, they've got WSL, they've got, WSL press conferences during the week, and then, they may well have a game on Saturday, a game on Sunday, and have various different things to tweet out for that. So a lot of their time is kind of centered around that. And generally, each newspaper will have one main women's football journalist. Like the Telegraph has Tom, the Guardian has, the Times has Molly, and there isn't really too many other people doing it. And I think until the game gets bigger, we're kind of in that paradox now, isn't it? Until the game gets bigger, there's not going to be more journalists, but until there's more journalists reporting on stuff, that will help the game get bigger, and something's going to have to break. But
if I can come in on that for a second, if you can, one of those comparisons we all hate to make, but if you compare it with the men's game, how often does somebody like Henry Winter go and watch a League One or League Two game and report on it? It doesn't happen. But what you might get is the FA Cup.
Yeah.
You know, they might go and watch a Kidderminster Harriers against Reading, to use a local third round tie from me. That's your opportunity, and that's where the Women's FA Cup can do the same thing. First round day, or when there's an international break, if it happens to coincide with the FA Cup, go and watch an FA Cup game or a Tier 4 game and report on that. Make a feature of it. There are opportunities to do things like that, I think. That's what I would say. You know, it doesn't have to be every week. I think that's totally unrealistic at the moment. But once or twice a season, I think you can make a feature of games like that if you think about it properly.
Yeah, to follow on from that quickly, again, using that example, BBC Radio Manchester has a journalist who generally does the Man United and Man City commentaries. But when those games aren't on, he'll be at the Oldham games, the Rochdale games, might be up at Bolton or Wigan or places around there. But obviously when the Premier League's on, he'll be at the Etihad or he'll be at Old Trafford or wherever. But, you know, we'll kind of touch on those other games as and when the opportunity is there. So, yeah, no, I think the international breaks, because there's no WSL, no championship games, they're a really good opportunity to get more content out there. Yeah.
There are always stories in the lower level.
Yeah.
It's the same as in the men's game. There are always stories. You can find them if you want to go out and look for them.
Yeah, no, I was just going to follow on from that. I agree. Obviously, I think for me, international breaks is massive, especially for outside the championship, because, you know, like we talked about, with the right promotion, the right advertising, you know, obviously we mentioned there's a lack of journalists, but if they're not all covering internationals, why can't they go and support their local side? And this is something we sort of jumped on as a podcast. And, you know, obviously John's took people over to Stourbridge, and, you know, that's local team. Obviously, we do things with FC United. You know, and again, like you mentioned, Gareth, obviously since 71, you know, Stu covers a lot of the sort of southern teams as well. And I think that's what it needs. You know, obviously we get that it's not possible to go every single week and to go home and away. But even if you're watching a few games a season and, you know, you run something on it, you write a match report, or you take a few pictures and tweet them out, or you give a sort of a little chat on video and say how you found it and how the experience was. Because I think at the end of the day, they're the clubs what benefit from sort of the exposure, and obviously the extra income, I know, is massively appreciated. I think it goes a long way. You know, there's a lot of emphasis in sort of the top league. There's a little bit less in the championship, but it's still better than sort of, you know, what's available support wise and sort of advertising out there in terms of social media from sort of 3 to 6 down. But I want to sort of finish with the final topic of, in both your views, what do you think we can do to sort of, you know, push it further in the women's game as a whole? So obviously, you know, we can talk WSL, but sort of what would you like to see maybe come in? I'll start with you, Richard, in terms of like just growing it, social media. Obviously, we've given some ideas, you know, tonight, but is there anything maybe extra that you think, oh, you know, actually, I'd sort of love to see that?
I think the key thing for me is clubs. I'm going to focus on clubs because that's where my interest is, if you like. I do work and support an individual club. It's for clubs to realise the importance of it. You know, I said earlier on, it's not just about attracting supporters; it's potential volunteers, attracting them, attracting sponsors, attracting advertisers. If you can present in this era that we're living in now, if you can present a good social media image of your club, an active social media image, I think that can open a lot of doors. And I think sometimes people just don't have the time to think about these things. You know, it's like everything we've said tonight comes down to volunteer resources, time available. But if you sit back for 10 minutes and just think, how important is this? I think people will probably realise it's more important than they probably think it is. With volunteer time scarce, is it more important to put the nets up on a Sunday afternoon or to spend 5 minutes tweeting on social media? Well, of course, it's more important to put the nets up because you don't have a game. But once you've got beyond those absolute basic requirements, have you got more time that you can dedicate to just making sure you're getting the information out there? I think that's the key thing to me, is to get more clubs more active.
100%. Gareth, have you anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a wish list more so than something that I think is available in the immediacy. I want to see more clubs streaming their games on YouTube or Facebook or wherever. We see a few championship clubs start to do it. There's a few tier 3 clubs that have started to do something similar as well. I've watched Oldham preseason games on a stream with just match sounds. Really, no need for anything kind of particularly extravagant or outlandish. You can kind of do it with a single camera setup, and I just think it kind of gives people access. And I think opening up access to the games and to the sport or the branch of the sport is going to be kind of the key way in which clubs can grow. But I understand that is difficult. It requires a setup, and it requires somebody, a volunteer like Rich has kind of said, that knows what they're doing with linking cameras up to YouTube and streaming setups and all that kind of stuff. So there are barriers there, but I think that would be kind of a really good kind of not too difficult way of opening things up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing with that as well, thinking about, obviously, you're talking about sort of the know-how and the technology side, but another thing as well is the cost. It's all well and good if you're sort of top 2 leagues, but who's going to be paying for a camera, for example, if you're in tier 6? It's going to come from ultimately club funds, which are already stretched enough. So again, whilst the idea is, it is difficult, isn't it? Obviously, maybe like you said, something as simple as maybe a Twitter live or a Facebook live, where it's free, it's not massively complicated. You just click and go live. There's no sort of, like you say, know-how if you're needing to sort of link things up, link YouTube up, how to do that, how to sort of edit and go about anything you may need to. And I think that's potentially a way forward. Maybe not now, but I think in the future, if clubs could get help with that, or if there's people willing to do it, then absolutely, I think that just opens the game up to a bigger audience, doesn't it? And there might be people that sort of live a few hours away that may not be able to travel, that can sort of link up and follow games. Or there may be people that are at work. We had Corey Mather on, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, Gareth, and she was saying her colleagues at work can't watch a play because there's nowhere that games are streamed. And I think it's finding that balance. Like I say, it's very, very difficult when you're not paid and you're a volunteer, and recruiting numbers and things like that. But on the flip side, if that could happen, it's a possibility and it could grow it. I know Burnley stream games on TikTok. There's a couple of people with a camera every home and away game, and they stream everything. It's brought them followers from around the world, which is crazy. But yeah, that's the sort of the power of your social media. We've come to the end of the show, so I want to thank you both for joining me. Thanks to Richard as well for giving up your time and for providing insight for us.
Yeah, no problem, Matt. I've enjoyed it.
We're back on Thursday, 7:00. John and Natalie's now back from a holiday, and they're joined by Mia Eriksson and Philip O'Connor. So they'll be giving a bit of a roundup on transfers, because we've got just over a week until the window shuts. And then Friday is Anthony's show and Fans Forum, and Saturday is myself and Ben on Saturday Night Live. So yeah, that's the schedule for the rest of the week. Thank you to everybody that's tuned in and watched, and thank you to everybody as well that's also commented, and we'll see you on Thursday. Cheers.